The main purpose of security risk assessment is to understand the nature and the extent of risks faced by organizations. By understanding security risks better, organizations are able to prepare and plan ahead through informed decision making. In this video discussion, we're going to be unpacking on how to conduct a security risk assessment process within an organization. Welcome to Security Nuggets Podcast, a professional channel that engages on security risk insights and perspectives for continuous learning purpose. And I'm your host, Ashley, a certified security risk consultant. It is always a pleasure to have you joining in these discussions. And without wasting any time, let's dive right into it. As we get started on this discussion, I would like to emphasize that the quality of the security risk assessment process that you conduct for your organization will always be contingent to the credibility, accuracy, and reliability of the information that you're using. And that is why it is very, very important for you to always leverage both quantitative and qualitative data research and collection techniques. Don't just use one mode of data collection. Leverage on several techniques so that you can refine the quality of the output that you're getting at the end of the process, okay? Let's expound on these two data collection and research techniques. That is the quantitative and the qualitative data research and collection techniques, all right? When we talk of qualitative techniques are subjective in the sense that they are non-numeric and center around spoken or written words. Example techniques that fall under qualitative methodologies can include structured interviews, semi-structured interviews, observation, case studies, etc., etc. When we talk of quantitative data research and collection techniques, these are numerical, all right? They entail measuring variables to support or reject a premise, okay? And this is done by collecting numerical data to identify statistical significance from a descriptive or comparative point of view. Some of the examples can include document review, all right? Some of the documentation that you can review can include incident reports, all right? Risk registers, security reports, because we can get a lot of information from these documentations when we want to understand threats, all right? When we want to understand the rate of occurrence, the rate of likelihood, as well as the extent of impact. This is documentation that we can actually be able to access and get that information, all right? And then translate that into numerical data. Another example of a quantitative technique is the Monte Carlo modeling, which entails running multiple trials on target action threats, so that we can be able to determine the various outcomes as well as the probability of them occurring. The risk matrix is actually a technique that falls under this concept, because what we do with the risk matrix is we are able to get statistics. We're able to get statistics that guide us through the process of risk identification and risk analysis, okay? Now, how do we conduct the security risk assessment process? Okay. And as we're having this discussion, I also want you to refer to our previous discussions over the last 3 video discussions when we started into this sequel of security risk management, okay? Because it is very important for you to also understand when we are developing and implementing the security risk management program structure within organizations, at what point do we get to conduct a security risk assessment, all right? Where does it fall under? in the security risk management framework. It's very important for you to understand that, okay? If you catch up with those discussions, then you won't have a problem following through on this discussion. But for context purpose, if you haven't had a chance to do that, all right? Once you formulate the security risk management framework, okay, the security risk assessment process falls under the direction, which is very much in the initial part of the development stage of the security risk management framework, okay? Because in the direction, we start by formulating a security risk management policy to give us more direction, all right? And then after we do that, now we are going to do the security risk assessment process, okay? Because again, the process guides us further into the implementation and execution of the security risk management framework, and by extension, the security risk management program, all right? Now, I have said this before, there is a misconception by some professionals that you can just do the security risk assessment process as an isolated thing and still expect to get productive results at the end of it, okay? And I remember countering that notion, because what would happen, you can do it, but what would happen is that at the end of it, it would not be a productive process, all right? And I was encouraging professionals when they are doing security risk assessments to actually make sure that they are doing it as a subset within the security risk management program, okay, so that it can be more productive, so that the output of it at the end of the process can be very much result-oriented, okay? And can again get to align with the overall organization goals and objectives, all right? Now, when you come to the security risk assessment process, okay, what do you do first? Because again, another misconception, I've seen professionals saying that, oh, we just start with risk identification, okay? Now, before you get to risk identification, there's something else that you need to do, right? And the process flow that we are going to be aligning this discussion with is in line with ISO 31000 Risk Management Standard Guide, okay? The ISO 31000 Risk Management Guide articulates guiding principles, and it articulates its own framework that it has provided for guidance, all right? And then it articulates its own process, all right? So we are going to take that process. We are going to take that process and contextualize it within the security risk management aspect, okay? Because again, remember, ISO 31000 Risk Management Standard, it is a guide for all aspects of risks. It's a guide that can be used for financial risks, for legal risks, for health risks, for safety risks, for insurance risks, for security risks. So in the security context, we are going to apply security into that context, okay? We're going to see how we can apply security risk management into that guidance as far as the process section is concerned, okay? And as you can see on the screen right now, there is actually an extraction of the process flow in diagram form from ISO 31000 Risk Management Standard Guide, okay? This is how ISO 31000 guides professionals to conduct the process of risk management within organizations, all right? And we are going to use it in this context where we are looking at the security risk assessment process, okay? So the first thing we do is we are going to establish the scope, the context, and the criteria as the first thing we do before we get into risk identification, okay? And the reason why it's important for you to be able to establish scope, context, and criteria first is because the information you get from those three is critical to input into the rest of the process as we proceed. Okay? Whatever we come up with under scope, context, and criteria influences how we go on with the process as we continue. Okay? You will also realize something else as we proceed, that the output of one stage or phase within the security risk assessment process becomes the input of the next phase in the process. Okay? So you want to make sure that whatever you are inputting into the next process of the security risk assessment process, whatever you are putting into the next stage, it is actually information that can be relied upon, it's accurate, and it is credible, okay? Because again, after that phase, you're going to go to the other phase, the next phase, and the information that is coming out becomes the information that you put into the next phase. So you want to make sure that whatever you're putting in and out of the process flow as you proceed is information that can be relied upon. It is information that can be accurate, and it is information that is credible, all right? Because if that's not going to be the case, the end result or the output of your security risk assessment process is going to be misguided. It's going to be misleading. The information that the decisions that you're going to be making at the end of it, especially pertaining the risk treatment and mitigation, a lot of it is going to be misaligned and misguided, all right? And as a result, you might either get a lot of skepticism from the rest of the team or from your leadership when you're presenting the risk management plan, all right? Because they are doubting the statistics, they are doubting the information that you're presenting. It's not making sense. So you back it up by using the right techniques, and you also back it up by making sure that as much as you're leveraging on best techniques, the information that you're having is very refined. It can be relied upon, it's accurate, and it's credible, all right? The other thing that you can have as a challenge, if you use information that is not credible and it's inaccurate and it is not reliable, is that whatever treatment plans that you're going to be implementing at the end of it, the systems you're going to be recommending and designing, when they're executed, they're not going to be reliable. All right? They are not going to be reliable towards the threats that you're trying to mitigate against, okay? There's going to be issues here and there, right? So get it right from the onset by making sure that you're taking your time. You're taking your time to gather the right information, whether you're gathering it from external sources or you're gathering it from internal sources within the organization. Make sure that that information is information that can be relied upon. It is information that is credible, and it is information that is accurate, all right? Because the decisions that are going to be made in the process are very important, all right? When we talk of scope, basically what we are saying is that we have to establish and determine the parameters within which the security risk assessment process is going to be conducted, all right? And also the activities that are going to be considered during the process, all right? For instance, if we say that we are going to do the security risk assessment process within the physical security domain, then we have parameters that we are not going to extend that to other domains like digital security or cyber security or information security, all right? We are going to restrict the process within physical security. Again, we can be looking at cyber security. The security risk assessment process is being done within the parameter of digital and technological domain, all right? We're looking at information security, right? So we are not going to expound the parameters and do more than what is considered, all right? Again, we can be doing it within crisis, and emergency. All right. So again, those are the parameters of the process. Okay. Again, we can be doing it within business continuity and resilience. Again, those are the parameters. Alternatively, you can do a security risk assessment process that incorporates and converges all these domains. So you're doing a process that is supposed to incorporate the physical security aspect. It's supposed to incorporate the digital security aspect. It's supposed to incorporate crisis and emergency. It's supposed to incorporate business continuity and resilience, etc., etc. So define the parameters in which the security risk assessment process is going to be conducted within, all right? So because you don't want to do what's beyond the parameters, okay? And also when it comes to activities of considerations, sometimes the process can be restricted within a project within the organization. So we want to do a security risk assessment process within a project that is either ongoing or a project that wants to be initiated, okay? So we want to identify the potential risks and prepare ourselves ahead before we have the project commissioned or initiated, right? Or maybe it's even an ongoing project. Or maybe the activity of consideration is maybe an operation within a business function or a department within the organization, okay? Maybe there's a very sensitive operation within a certain department, and we want to put security considerations within that operation, and we want to do the security risk assessment so that we can be able to identify what would be the inherent security risks within these operations so that we can be able to mitigate against them, all right? So that is what we mean by scope. This needs to be well outlined and defined. Again, you also need to make sure that whatever you are establishing you're doing is aligned again with the organization goals and objectives. And in this space of establishing the scope of the process, of the SRA process, you can also refer to the policy. You can refer to the main primary policy. We had that discussion in our previous video. Kindly have a look at that if you missed out on it. It was titled Preparing a Security Risk Management Policy. When you're in this phase of establishing the scope, you can borrow from the primary policy so that it can also direct you properly, all right? After you establish the scope, because again, it is going to influence how we move forward, all right? That is why it is the first thing that you do, because it dictates and influences whatever else happens from there, all right? We now come to context. And in context, basically, we are looking at the internal and both the external factors that are going to potentially influence the risk landscape, okay? Because we have those things that influence the risk landscape, and they actually influence the manner at which the security risk assessment process is going to be conducted, okay? When you're looking at some of the internal factors under context, internally we are talking of within the organization, all right? Within the organization. For instance, the capabilities, all right? What are the capabilities within the organization, all right? In terms of both knowledge and skills, all right? In terms of expertise or technology, all right? Because again, when you're doing the security risk assessment process, you want to make sure that it is being done within the available capabilities of the organization, okay? And if it will extend beyond that, then we are talking about sourcing. So are we going to outsource external capabilities where we don't have it internally? All right. So if that is something that has been established as an alternative way to go about it, then you can look and see what capabilities are we missing and what capabilities do we need to outsource, okay? If you're looking at leveraging technological or software automation systems, are these things that you have in the organization? Do you have those capabilities? Okay. If you don't, are you thinking of is outsourcing external expertise that can have that can provide these technological and automation solutions? Is that something that you're willing to do as an organization? So you need to consider that moving forward in the security risk assessment process. Okay. Again, as far as internal context is concerned, the issue of financial position. Okay. How is the organization's financial capability? Like, are we having a restricted budget? Maybe you've been given a budget and you've been told, listen, this is the budget we are willing to accommodate as an organization for this particular initiative or project. Okay. So in the security risk assessment process, you're going to do it within the allocated budget. Okay. Again, still under financial position, there are some resources that you might need when you're conducting the security risk assessment process. Resources that are also linked to finances, okay? You might need to outsource expertise. Is there a budget to afford that cost? All right. So these are things that you need to consider. And also, when you're talking of financial context, it becomes very important for you when you're doing the security risk assessment process. It becomes very important for you to make sure that whatever you're recommending or whatever you're coming up with at the end of it in your treatment recommendations, you can be able to support it from a cost point of view. All right. What is the expected return on investment? What is the cost benefits analysis? You need to support your recommendations with better statistics to your leadership, okay? Because if you have a leadership that is very keen on investing only where there is some sort of reward coming in or where it's justified, then you need to justify that cost, okay? So that is another internal context that is going to influence how you're doing the security risk assessment process. The other thing is culture, okay? Well, how is your organization culture? Because the organization culture is going to influence a lot of things in the security risk assessment process, okay? For instance, when it comes to the security risk assessment process, there is a lot of communication and consultation that is needed to be done. There is a lot of recording and reporting that needs to be done. How are your communications within the organization? So you need to align the process with your communication styles within the organization, all right? You need to align the process with the organization culture, all right? For instance, are you looking and seeing that we don't have a security risk culture? We don't have a security risk aware culture in organization. Is that something you'd want to change? Would you want to subtly change that moving forward? Then you can see how you can incorporate that within the process. You can weave that within the process, okay? And make the process much more collaborative, much more engaging, so that that can be a starting point of you nurturing and building that security risk awareness culture within the organization, okay? As far as external context is concerned, you can be talking of things like political context, okay? Where your organization is operating, how is the political status? Are you in a state that is politically stable or politically unstable? Okay. We know that states that have political instability, that instability tends to trickle down and affect a lot of factors. For instance, it affects peace and security. Okay. So do you need to factor that in the security risk assessment process? Okay. Some of the controls and recommendations that you're going to be putting in place under treatment, are they going to require strategies that can be used and executed when there is an emergency associated with the political instability? Okay. Are you going to be incorporating evacuation protocols, emergency protocols? If there is political instability to a point where the lives of your employees and the state of your assets is in jeopardy, how can you have a contingency to counter that sort of impact towards the organization if the political instability affects you? Okay, for states that are politically stable, then they don't have to worry about those kind of risks, but they do need to worry about other political associations of policies. What are the security policies? What are the legal requirements? What are the regulations that the state has put in place as far as security is concerned, so that you can again align the process with the regulations and standards, all right? Another external factor is the social aspect, all right? Now, it is inaccurate to actually correlate the fact that where there is poverty, there is crime, okay? But based on the statistical data, the evidence that we have now, it's been proven that organizations that are located within socially deprived areas, they tend to be targets. They tend to be victimized, okay? So you will have to actually put that in mind as you're doing your security risk assessment process. For instance, you're an organization that is located in an area where you're bordering a slum area. Okay. Now, you need to be aware of the fact that that is an area where maybe some of your employees are also going to be residing from. Okay. So, what are the socioeconomic challenges that organizations might face? You might be looking at issues of uh, insider threats, or where your employees are colluding with external adversaries from that slum dwelling area, So you need to be cognizant of all these things so that you can incorporate and you can factor in all these considerations within the security risk assessment process, okay? From the beginning to the end of the process, okay? I was just giving examples of both internal and external factors, but they are quite a lot, all right? When it comes to criteria, which is the other phase, the third phase that we get into. In this phase of criteria, this is where you determine the amount of risks that your organization is willing to accept. Okay? The organization is willing to accept this amount of risks or this nature of risks to whatever extent of degree, okay? And again, it also speaks on the organization's risk appetite, all right? If you're an organization that has a high risk appetite, then you're able to accept and tolerate more risks. If you're an organization with a low risk appetite, then you are going to be averse to a lot of these risks. You will want to mitigate most of these risks to as low as reasonable, practical, right? And again, what influences an organization's risk appetite? Okay, a lot of things influence that. For instance, the leadership attitudes and perceptions. Okay, the area of operation, the environment that you're operating on. All right, again, the financial position. All right, and many other factors. Okay, and also in this phase, we are also going to be determining what are the measurement metrics that we are going to be using for us to actually measure the significance of these risks. How are we going to establish the impact? How are we going to measure the impact of threats towards an organization? What criteria are we going to be using? How are we going to measure the likelihood of some of these threats to organization? What criteria are we going to be using? We don't do these things when we are at the risk analysis section. No, we need to have figured all these out from the onset when we're in this stage of criteria, all right? And after now you have figured all these things out, the scope, the context, and criteria, now we get right into business, okay? What does it entail for you to do a risk identification? Hmm? You need to know what you need to do in this phase of risk identification. I will mention it in passing. In risk identification, there are two very important processes that fall under risk identification. One, the threat assessment, and two, the vulnerability assessment. You've got to do the threat assessment because it feeds into the vulnerability assessment, okay? So they follow each other like that. The output of the threat assessment becomes the input of the vulnerability assessment. What are we doing in threat assessment? We are analyzing potential threats that could be target to the organization, okay? So we start off by identifying the assets, the critical assets within the organization, okay? And how do you determine the criticality of an asset within the organization? How do you determine the importance of an asset within the organization? If that is an asset that would have more impact when it is when it is interfered with or compromised or stolen, then that is a critical asset. Okay. If the extent of impact would be so severe, then that is a critical asset. Okay. Again, in this stage of asset characterization, you want to find out how do these assets work? Are they clustered assets whereby they are working together for operational continuity? Okay, because a lot of assets in an organization don't work in isolation. One asset requires another asset and another asset and another asset for it to be able to do the operational continuity. For instance, I'll give an example, okay? Let's look at the business function of logistics. So in this business function, it is basically transport and logistics. So we are moving organization merchandise, or we are moving whatever we are moving for on behalf of the organization from point A to point B, okay? So we are using vehicles, right? A vehicle is an asset, right? We are using a driver. A driver is an asset, okay? The driver's know-how or how to drive, that's an asset. The process of driving, that's an asset, okay? Again, the vehicle needs to move on infrastructure. So those roads are infrastructures, okay? Again, the vehicle needs fuel for it to be operational, unless it's an electric vehicle. And still, if it's an electric vehicle, it still needs to be charged, right? So all these are cluster assets, and they have to all be combined together for that operational continuity to be there. Otherwise, if one of the assets is missing in the equation, then the operation is destabilized, right? The vehicle won't run without a driver, and the driver won't be able to work without a vehicle. You see what I mean there? Good. So you also have to see how that interconnection is, and also the functions of each asset, all right? And how they are interconnected, okay? That is what you do in asset characterization, all right? You also get to understand if the asset was attached, it's compromised, it's stolen, it's sabotaged, how would that impact the organization, and to what extent would it impact to the organization? All right. How would it destabilize the organization operations? All right. How much would it cost the organization in terms of cost implication? All right. When we're talking of impact, we are looking at immediate impact and consequential impact. We are looking at direct and indirect loss. How would that be? All right. And also in threat assessment, again, we now, after doing the asset characterization, we now come and do a threat identification. So now here we identify the threats. Okay, we identify the threats. And we are using different threat identification techniques. This is where you leverage techniques like the geopolitics analysis, the local crime analysis, open source intelligence. Okay. You leverage on the historical incident data report that you're having. You leverage on previous security risk assessment processes that may have been done before, or security audits or reviews. If there's a record of that, you're looking at that as well. You're looking at reports, you're looking at that. Okay. And sometimes even when you're doing the asset characterization, you need to engage other stakeholders. You need to talk to the asset custodians and the risk owners. You need to talk to all these stakeholders so that you can understand the assets properly. And you can also understand the operations properly, because you're heading the process as a security professional, you're the security expert. But again, you need to understand whatever goes on in the whole organization, in other business functions. So you need to communicate and consult with other stakeholders for you to be able to understand the criticality of an asset, all right? And still in threat identification, again, you still need to communicate and consult with these stakeholders. They might have more information that can help the process. Their views and perspectives might be important. So in threat identification, we just want to have a broader view of potential threats that could be target organizations, okay? So after we do that, now we come and profile those threats, because we want to profile threats that are target to the organization, okay? We don't want to pay attention on threats that are not likely to be target to our organization, because every organization is unique. It's unique in context, it's unique in its operations, it's unique in its niche, it's an industry of operation, okay? So by doing the threat identification, you're able to narrow down the target threats that are targeting your organization. So now you come and do the threat profiling. Okay, so when you're doing the threat profiling, this is where you expound further in understanding the threat action. You want to understand the adversary better. You want to understand the adversary action better. You also want to understand the asset better. Okay, what's the adversary action? How do they intend to get to the critical asset of the organization? What strategies and techniques are they planning to use? What are the strategies that are known to have been used before? Okay, what's the motivation behind it? Where would this adversary be coming from? Are they from within the organization, outside the organization? How long would they take to reach to the asset? How long would they take to circumvent any controls that are in place? Okay, if we were to detect the adversary action, how long would it take for us to respond and neutralize this threat action? Okay, this is where you establish all that out in the threat profiling, all right? And then the information you get during the threat assessment now becomes the input. It's the output of the threat assessment process, and it becomes the input of the vulnerability assessment process. What are we doing in the vulnerability assessment? Basically, what we are doing here is we are establishing whether the organization is prepared to counter the target threat actions that have been established in the threat assessment process. Do we have the relevant controls in place? Are the controls we have in place adequate? Are they baseline? Are they inadequate? Or are they lacking totally? So that means we are so exposed as an organization, okay? What are the security controls we are having in place? Are they valid? Are they reliable? Okay. We're also going to test them in the process of vulnerability assessment. We're going to test them because we want to see their reliability. We want to see their efficacy. Are they efficient? All right. So that is what we do in the vulnerability assessment. All right. And then the output of the vulnerability assessment becomes the input in the next phase of risk analysis. Okay. And in risk analysis, what exactly are we doing here? Okay, what are we doing in risk analysis? What we are doing in risk analysis is we want to analyze, okay, the threats that we have highlighted, all right? And the assets that we have highlighted, all right? We want to see, okay, what is the level of impact if the assets were compromised or sabotaged or stolen? You know, if the threat action was to actualize, what would be the impact? What's the level of impact? We are analyzing that risk impact, okay? Again, we are analyzing the likelihood of that risk. How often are we thinking it's going to occur? What's the occurrence likelihood like? How often are we looking and saying that this risk is going to be happening? We are analyzing that, okay? We are analyzing that in the risk analysis phase, okay? So this is where we are going to compare and plot between impact and likelihood, and we are able to establish that a threat action that incorporates the critical asset, the potential adversary, and the threat action, we are going to plot and see what would be the intermediate risk value. Simply put, what we do in the face of risk analysis is basically establishing the risk probability. We want to establish the probability of impact and the likelihood of occurrence, okay? So we are going to use different techniques to establish the probability and the likelihood of occurrence, okay? And this is where a concept like the risk matrix concept, which is a Monte Carlo modeling concept, can come in play, all right? And you can leverage other techniques so that you can refine the quality of what you're coming out with, okay? And also in risk evaluation, this is where we are taking the risks another notch higher, because what we're doing here in risk evaluation, we want to plot and be able to see which risks are going to take priority in terms of mitigating this concern, okay? So we are plotting in risk evaluation. We want to evaluate the priority of risks, okay? Which risks rank high in terms of priority so that organization can pay more attention to them, okay? A risk that would rank high in terms of priority is a risk that would have high severity impact. It is a risk that is more likely to happen in your organization. The likelihood of occurrence is high. And when you look at the controls in place, they are not sufficient. They're either baseline or inadequate or lacking completely. So the exposure rate is very high risk. It's very like extreme. So it needs attention, okay? So that is what you're evaluating, okay? You're evaluating. And you're also evaluating and looking and seeing in regards to the criteria we established, okay? If the risk is towards a project, then if that risk is too high and we have a low risk tolerance as an organization, we are risk averse, is that a project that we can put on hold or say we don't want to continue with it? All right? Or is it a project that we are going to say we want to go ahead with it because we are probably an organization with a high risk appetite? We're going to say we're going to go on with that project, but what we're going to do is we're going to put countermeasures. We're going to come up with ideal treatment plans to mitigate against the risk, but we are definitely going ahead with the project, okay? So again, you refer back to what you determined when you establishing criteria, okay? And also you determine, are these risks that we can mitigate by probably putting security considerations within day-to-day operations and activities, especially for low risks that are tolerable. you mitigate them through day-to-day activities and operations, okay? For high risks, then management needs to come in and allocate a budget and resources so that the required controls can be implemented, or the required expertise can be outsourced, etc., right? So that is what you do ideally in risk evaluation. We move into the next phase of risk treatment, okay? So if you remember the video discussion that we had on the security risk management framework, when we're looking at the framework, you remember very well, after we do the security risk assessment process, we do the risk management plan, and we now get into the systems. So that's what we are doing here under the treatment. You're basically coming up with the controls that are required. You're designing the treatment action plans, all right? You're designing what's required, how it can be implemented, tentative cost implication of executing them. When it comes to responsibilities, who is going to be required for its execution, and all that, all right? And again, in risk treatment, now this is, when we get into risk treatment, that is now where the body of the framework gets filled up. It now starts to build. It now starts to build the skeleton and the backbone of the security risk management framework. It starts building. When you're doing the risk treatment, it starts building, and it builds more as you're executing. Whatever you have designed, whatever system you have designed, in the process of executing, the program continues to formulate and to fill up, all right? And in reference to the picture that's displayed on the screen of the process of security risk assessment, you can see that at the bottom of it, we have recording and reporting, all right? Because it is going to be very important for us to always make sure that we have a record. We need to have a record of how the treatment action plans are being executed, all right? And when risks happen, they need to be recorded, all right? They need to be recorded. Because again, remember, as you can see on the other side of the diagram, we have monitoring and review, all right? Because again, the process needs to be iterative. We need to continuously keep monitoring and reviewing. We need to continuously keep monitoring and reviewing, okay? As we continue implementing and executing the program, okay, we are definitely continuing to review how the treatments we recommended are doing. We are monitoring their progress. We are monitoring their validity, reliability, and efficacy, okay? And we are also reviewing, all right? So it's another ongoing process. So as we recommend a treatment plan, we also have to be able to design the workflows. We need to design templates that are going to be used for documentation. We need to have all that documentation and paperwork sorted out. Whether we are doing it via written records or via software where we are inputting this data, whatever the case, there needs to be a record of that, okay? And on the other side, you're seeing we are having communication and consulting. This is because it is very important for us to continuously keep engaging the stakeholders and to continuously keep talking and collaborating with everybody who is concerned. And in this case, it's a whole organization. They are all concerned on the security risk effort within the organization. So communication and consulting becomes very important. And I remember when we were talking about security risk management program, I remember saying that how we start off is by benchmarking, by communicating and consulting with the relevant people within an organization. They have a stake in security. So we are going to consult and communicate with them and benchmark the initiative that we want to implement a security risk management program, all right? So that we can better be able to be of value to the organization as a security function, okay? So again, communication and consulting. Even when you're establishing the security risk assessment process, scope, context, and criteria, there is that communication and consulting that needs to happen. Yeah. When you're doing the risk identification, you need to consult and communicate with other people. All right. You need to communicate and consult with other people. As much as you'll probably be observing some of these operations and activities, you also need to ask questions, you need to communicate, you need to get other people's inputs and perspectives, all right? So there's a lot of communication and consultation that is going on. Maybe you have external experts, you need to communicate and consult with them. You need to keep your leadership updated of what's going on. So again, there's a lot of communication going on there. Because of time constraint, we have only covered this subject in passing. It is a broad subject, all right? Now, if you feel like you need to brush off your security risk management and subsequent security risk assessment process proficiency, I do have an ongoing masterclass. Initially, we were doing it in group sessions, so it was scheduled on quarterly basis. But because of the demand and numerous requests, we have now launched a self-paced masterclass for professionals who are busy and they need a more flexible schedule, or for participants who are in states where the time variance between the state they are in and my state in Kenya, in East Africa, the time variance tends to challenge them for being part of the group sessions. Okay, so we have a self-paced security risk management masterclass course. So if you're interested in that, kindly reach out to me and we can work out a plan and have you onboarded for that. I'll actually link a video discussion in the description below of one of the video discussions where I actually delve deep into this masterclass, what it entails, how we do it, and what we basically cover in it, all right? I'll tag that below. I'll also link my email address. I'll share my email address just in case you want to reach out to me, all right? So that's it for this video discussion. I want to thank you for being part and parcel of it. Thank you for keeping me company. I really do hope that you found it insightful and you have benefited from some of the insights that we have been discussing in this video episode, all right? And until our next episode, thank you for watching and goodbye for now.